Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. In this episode, I'd like to share some tips for energetically sensitive people living in crazy times. So 2020 and rolling into 2021, it's been a real time of it for humanity, and there are lots of reasons that it's been challenging or amazing or complicated, or gifts have arrived or challenges have happened and everything in between. But for energetically sensitive people, there's an additional layer to this that I think is really important to acknowledge and work with in your care and feeding manual for how you make it through feeling relatively balanced and capable. One of the things that's really hard on all humans when we're in complicated times, when the rug is being pulled out from under us, when weird things are happening, is that we can get kicked out of our executive brain and into our instinct brain. And the counsel that that has is not particularly helpful for the modern era. So the fight, flight, freeze, and go for higher status, like all the weird things that we do when our instincts are activated, the polarization. One of the things that is useful to know about humans is when we're under stress, they're huge brain chemistry rewards for simplifying situations into friend or foe. And so we have this biological reward to forget nuance, to forget kind things that someone has done, and to square off against them when there's a conflict in some really dramatic ways. And so humans do a lot better when we can move ourselves back into our executive brain. But the truth of the last year and continuing on is that we've had to deal with a lot of humans who are not in their executive brain, who are in their reactive fight or flight, us versus them, amorphous fear, anxiety, adrenaline, cortisol, all of that. And we've probably had to deal with some of that within ourselves. And that makes things really, really tough. And that's humans across the board. So then when we get to the energetically sensitive people, one of the cool things that many of us have is a more direct personal relationship to the eternal, to spirit, to the universe. And sometimes this looks like being able to just feel the heartbeat of the cosmos. Some people frame it in different spiritual terms. But whatever your framework for understanding the bigger picture, the benevolent universe, a direct personal relationship to that can be really anchoring and really reassuring, and a way to sort of hold your compass steady in tumultuous times. And that's really important. But the trouble is when the energy gets so loud, it often sort of resides between us and our ability to reach out and touch the divine in a really visceral manner. And it overstimulates our energetically sensitive senses, our sense of energy, for lack of a better term. Sometimes it's hard to put this stuff into language, that would allow us to really directly feel and experience these anchor points like old growth trees, or the movement of the ocean, or a felt sense of the Milky Way overhead. There's an ability to feel these things in a direct, visceral way that is increased if you have a sensitivity to energy. But you also feel everything else more vividly unless you really trained yourself to work with it. So as energetically sensitive people, training ourselves and having really good shields and filters and protections on our home, and protocols for when we get tired and it's harder to drown out the noise, is a really important part of our quality of life in the world. I wouldn't change my energetic sensitivity for anything, but it really diminished my quality of life until I learned how to manage it, and I learned the tools and the skills that go with it. And not to digress too much, but something like my Energy Body Illumination program or Ted Andrews' book Psychic Protection are a really powerful place to start if you're aware that you're sensitive but untrained in how to filter and shield and protect your energy and clear cords with other people and really have that sort of energetic sovereignty. So that's a really important starting place, but I would offer that even people with excellent skills, lots of training, lots of ability in these areas, are still finding that the last calendar year has been really hard and really impactful. And for a lot of us, it seems like we can do even more practices and get to not quite as good a place. So there's sort of an uphill nature. And I want to sort of illuminate something that's going on in the background that's unseen that I think is tremendously impactful. And specifically, that's the fact that humanity is all paying attention, or most of us are paying attention to some of the same things at the same time. And that's not normal. First of all, we have more humans on the planet than we've ever had before. And second of all, even when large groups of people were going through different things, they were having their independent journey with it. And even if we go back to group experiences that really did have impact on everyone. I remember when I was in college, a professor of mine talking about the Civil War and saying, this was pretty impactful for just about every single American. That was the nature of everything that happened. And then we unpacked lots and lots of different things about it. And I would say that World War II was a time when humans were tremendously impacted, but we didn't have the rapid rate of information coming in. So even if you read the headlines in the newspaper, if you were working on a farm, you went back to milking the cows or whatever you were up to, you certainly weren't checking NPR every few hours on your smartphone to see what the latest and greatest was on whatever was going on. And so starting with COVID, we had this experience of fear and take apart. It affected our physical safety. It affected our economic systems. It deeply affected our relationships. So even if you're sheltering at home and you have a good place to live and economic security and, relatively good quality of life, there's still ways that we're hardwired as humans to be connected to each other. And scientists, when they're looking at mortality rates in older adults, are putting loneliness up there with smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for the adverse impact on longevity. And that's a pretty amazing thing to think about. And in the disconnection that we've all lived with, it's a acutely stressful psychological thing for human beings. And for energetically sensitive people and empathic people, often we don't just feel our own fear or unsettledness or discomfort. We feel that of the collective. And so, again, it's not normal for so many people to be feeling afraid or angry or stressed or uncertain all at the same time, to have such a uniform focus. And it makes the collective consciousness really, really loud in a way that most of us have never experienced in a sustained way in our lifetime. I remember in the US at 9/11 feeling a similar wow, this is interesting, with the sort of indrawn breath of an experience that so many people had. There was a sort of a shock and grief and really pause where I think a lot of people went, wow, what am I doing with my life? How is it going? There was a lot of complexity. I'm not sure I could even put it into words, but I remember distinctly noticing the feeling that happened when so many people in the country that I was living in were having this experience. And this was amplified to worldwide. And of course, if you happen to be living in the US, we've had our own particular difficulties on top of COVID and all the disruption that that's created. Our reckoning with a long history of racial injustice is something that's been very, very impactful. And I think it's important, but it's also hard for empathic, sensitive people to feel that pain and anger and distress on top of the existing fear and uncertainty and everything else that was going on. And we've had perhaps the most divisive political experience, certainly in my lifetime, certainly anything that I've seen, where there's a lot of pain and anger. And it's a time where a lot of people are finding that it's more comfortable to be in anger than it is to be in sadness or fear. And they're not wrong in the short term. The biochemistry of everything that gets released with being really, really furious at someone feels a lot better than sadness or fear. It's a rush when you feel that sort of righteous, justified anger. Over time, it really damages the immune system and the heart and does a lot of really unfortunate things. So sustained anger makes us really sick, but in the first oomph of it, it actually feels like a relief from other things. So a lot of people are reaching for anger rather than sitting with some of the other emotions and letting them move through. And I would argue that modern humans have developed their mental intelligence a lot more than their emotional intelligence, and that is impacting our experience of all the events that are going on. And the lack of ability to deal with emotion and have it move through for so many people has kept the collective consciousness really loud and difficult and spiky. And so what happens if you're an energetically sensitive person sheltering at home, minding your own business, is that when you go to reach up into the cosmos to reorient, or reach out for your spirit guides, if that's your framework, or spend time in prayer, or connect in some way, and you sort of unfurl your energy, you may feel the acuteness and the loudness of everyone else's pain in a really visceral way, and it may cause you to need to pull back into yourself. And what's hard about this is often it's run low level in the background. So you may have found yourself suddenly being really angry or really sad without really knowing why. And you may have found yourself being a lot more tired. And what's important to know about this is, first of all, just to spot like, oh, wow, it is loud right now. Things are really stirred up, even in the baseline of what's been, the last calendar year, 2020 rolling into 2021. There's certainly been times where things would spike really high and things were more in the groove of the new normal and everything in between. And so having that be something that is on your radar to pay attention to, so that if you do have psychic protection and energetic protection exercises, you can employ them. You can say, I know what's going on. I need to be really mindful about putting myself in a bubble today if I'm going to the grocery store. I think I'll wear the kind of jewelry that amplifies my personal protections. I think I'll really pay attention to roots in the ground. I'll call in my spiritual protectors to walk with me, to really support me, whatever it is that works for you. And consciously unplugging from the collective. So as energetically sensitive people, I don't think we really have that much capacity ever to turn collective loudness to zero. I think I'm never going to have as good a day when humanity as a whole is having a hard time. But if I deliberately unplug, if I deliberately turn the volume down, I'm going to have an easier time of it. And this is something that works off of intention and focus. So starting off, just being aware that this is something to pay attention to is a really, really important piece of this, because when you're troubleshooting, I don't feel right and I'm not sure what it is, this might not be the thing that most immediately springs to people's minds. But if you learn to ask yourself the question, is this even mine? That's really powerful for the empath and the energetically sensitive person. And then from there, there's a work of intention and focus to disconnect. Maybe there's a visualization you come up with of, for me, sort of unplugging tendrils or cords of energy that go to the collective and re-engaging them with the heavens above. So connecting to source and really dropping my roots in the ground, and dropping my roots in the ground deep so that I get to the layers of the earth that humans aren't messing with. Because the truth of the energy of 2020 into 2021 is that not all living beings are having a hard time. The trees are pretty much as happy as they've ever been, and the rabbits in my area are happily breeding and making more bunnies, and the coyotes are singing in the hills, and in some ways nature is even more in its flow because of the way that human activity has been a little bit reduced during this time. And to give you an example of working with this, when I went to Ireland, I only had a limited number of days that I was going to be in Ireland for that trip. And what I was really interested in was connecting with the ley lines, with the stone circles, with the sacred wells, with the life force of all the beautiful green rolling hills. And that's absolutely an authentic truth of Ireland. There's also a layer of Ireland that is a people who've been horrifically oppressed for many years. Things have shifted and changed in the modern era, but there are a lot of ancestral wounds of people starving to death because of the way occupation by the English was happening. And during a famine when the Irish were dying of starvation, the English were exporting food from Ireland. And the pain of this very long-term and horrific kind of treatment is also in the collective energy of Ireland. And I just made sure that I didn't vibe with that I didn't connect with that layer, that I dropped down into the heartbeat of the land, that I connected with people more at the level of their authentic contemporary joy of making music or whatever was going on. So it was like a bandwidth or a frequency that I was moving my sensitivity away from and tuning into the things that I wanted. And that might be a little bit more of a concrete way to think about adjusting your relationship to the collective, tuning off that frequency. And it takes ongoing intention and focus because we're sort of hardwired to be attuned to other humans. It's a good survival strategy to, if everybody else in the tribe is freaked out about something, you might want to lift your head up and look around and try to figure out what it is. But the trouble is we're just getting those cues at a low level over and over and over again without ceasing and without it being anchored in clear and present danger. And there isn't really a problem to solve for many of us in the immediate sense. And so we just can end up amped up on not very fun chemistry for really long periods of time, which is really harmful to our health and our well-being and our sleep and our relationships and all kinds of different things. So in addition to that, unplugging or turning the dial, using your intention and focus to focus on not only I don't want to tune into the collective, I don't want to feel the pain of the collective. There's plenty of beautiful work we can do on behalf of the collective. So if you're looking to be of service, Pema Chodron's Tonglen is a beautiful practice. There are lots of loving kindness meditations and things that we can do that are really in service to the good of humanity. But what we don't want to do is run collective fear and pain through our personal emotional matrix. We want to reserve our personal emotional matrix for our own rise and fall, the heartbeat of our own emotion, our own human experience, and work transpersonally with being in service to transmuting energy if that's something that you're called to. And again, there's lots of really great wisdom for how you can be helpful with the collective vibration and the collective fears and how to work with that. But having it running low level ambient in the background is not so good. So consciously turning that off, and some of that is practices like putting down your cell phone and limiting how much you check the news, and some of it's custody of the mind where you notice you're thinking about it, and some of it is bringing your attention to what you want to be tuned into, old growth trees or the people that you love or beauty and wonder that you see in the natural world. Heck, turn on the window channel and, watch a camera that's just been put on a beach to record the waves coming in and going out as the sun goes down, or a waterfall. There are all these opportunities to redirect our attention and our awareness. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is just supporting your own personal filters and protections with other things. And so I won't go into it in too much depth here, but one of the things you may want to look into is wards, W-A-R-D-S. You'll see a lot about that in Wiccan culture, but it's something that you find in traditions all over the world, which is basically in our home, how do we keep out the bad energy and invite in the good energy? And there are many, many bodies of knowledge, many, many approaches. It was a really key concern of humans up until really recently of how to do that. And so finding a way that you use your home space to filter the energy, and there's, again, it's a complicated kind of practice. There are ways I can support people with it. There are ways to do it on your own. But this idea that you are going to use a barrier of energetic protection to filter before your personal energy field has to filter, so you can rest and recover and recuperate and have a peaceful, safe space at home. Another thing that's really useful is to think about what protects you personally that amplifies your own barrier of the edge of your auric field. So personally, I love rocks and crystals. So I have jewelry that is beautiful, but also often provides energetic protection. Herkimer diamonds, black tourmaline, these are stones that are really good for this kind of thing. Some people really love essential oils, for example. There are just many, many ways to do this. Even wearing black clothing with intention can be a good way to help filter out energy from coming in that you don't want. So you don't have to do it all with your intention and your focus and your natural energy body. It's also really super useful to rebuild your energy body and your vitality. So anything like yoga or tai chi or qigong that builds life force energy is going to be really supportive, because you're just burning up extra dealing with being in the soup that is the world in take apart times. There's a lot that's reorganizing, and it's just not comfortable to be in the middle of it. For some people, it can be really beautiful and exciting, and there are cool opportunities that we're taking out of it, but it's also really uncomfortable. And so just sort of recognizing that we may need to consciously build our vitality to offset the impact of being in the world at this time. As I mentioned before, the practice of visualizing roots in the ground and branches up to the sky is a really good way to sort of reorient. Like, here I am on the planet and I'm being in me, connected above and below, rather than tracking the amorphous energy of all that is being dismantled and reassembled and in motion. There's a certain custody of the mind that's good for me, which is reminding myself that how much armchair quarterbacking I do of the people in political office or the people who are in the medical model of distributing things may not be me staying in my lane and doing me as effectively as I could. And I'm not saying don't get involved at all, but be really conscious about your engagement. So if I'm, rather than stewing for 4 hours about a government decision that I disagree with, sitting down for half an hour and writing an articulate letter to the appropriate person might be a much better and more effective approach than just kind of having that amorphous, I don't agree with it, but I'm not really participating or taking right action in any way. A couple of years ago, I listened to the Little Book of Hugin, which is by a Danish happiness researcher, and I think that some of the wisdom in the Danish concept of Hugin, that coziness, and to me it's also a lack of stimulation that seems to inform people who have a higher average level of happiness than the rest of the world population. And for people in first world countries whose circumstances are pretty good, who are still experiencing a lot of stress and difficulty and challenge, it's really good to look at, like, hey, whose overall happiness is better and what are they doing that I might be able to apply? And I think that overstimulation is a challenge that a lot of us are dealing with it in an unprecedentedly acute way. And stimulation is kind of fun. If you watch any young child who doesn't want to go to bed, they're not interested in destimulating with things that soothe and calm them. They often tend to kind of want to wind themselves up and get that last stimulation in for the day. So I totally recognize the urge to constantly watch an exciting movie or engage in Facebook or whatever it is that provides stimulation. We get a lot of chemistry rewards for stimulating things, and it's very easy to be magnetized toward them. But a discipline of coming into curling up with a peaceful and good book, or sitting by the fire, or watching a nature show, particularly a soothing nature show. Sometimes they make them sound really dramatic, of the survival of the fittest, and I'm talking more about something that's like, look at the beautiful changes of season, look at all the happy baby animals, but something that really gives your nervous system a chance not to deal with more stimulation. I think creating times that are yen and peaceful peaceful and soothing and cozy and all is well. And doing that before we're completely exhausted, because a lot of people only find yin and rest when they've completely exhausted all of the resources. And that's a hard place to go into yin because it doesn't feel very fun because you're super tired. And if you've been doing any emotional numbing, you'll start feeling whatever it is that you were trying to avoid feeling, and you'll be too tired to go do something else to get away from it. So it kind of sets up a dynamic where people can avoid peaceful downtime like crazy because of what arises. And I can say from personal experience, there's something really beautiful on the other side when you've allowed yourself to not be emotionally numbing and not be exhausted and come into stillness for the sake of self-nurturing and intimacy with yourself and presence and peacefulness and deliciousness. There's some territory that a lot of people never really find their way to, or they certainly don't in their younger years. It wasn't something I found until I got a little further along in my human journey. So thank you so much for listening. I have so much compassion for how hard it is to be human at this time. I think that there are lots of ways that the modern era keeps us unprecedentedly safe and protected and well in ways our ancestors couldn't even conceive of, but they're also really unique, painful, difficult, complicated things about being a modern human. And a lot of our environment is ill-suited to our hardwiring of biology, and deeply understanding that I think is really valuable for anyone. And if you're energetically sensitive, understanding what it is to be a sensitive person at this time in the world is really valuable information, so that you can get your care and feeding manual right, because you could eat healthy and get lots of sleep and get the right amount of movement and still be in a lot of struggle if you're not also tending to the energetic side, the ways that you're being stimulated by the unseen world. And having that aligned around your good is a really important part of thriving in the world as an energetically sensitive and empathic person. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.